The galaxy had long whispered the same name with dread, Threx. Their ships, forged like blades, cut through star systems without hesitation. They were the unquestioned rulers of interstellar war, a race whose very presence meant submission or slaughter. Every species bent before them, conceding to their ruthless philosophy of dominance. To the Threx, weakness was a sin, and survival was the only measure of worth. In every corner of the known galaxy, they were spoken of as Alpha, the predators who could not be challenged. When humanity finally pushed beyond its home system, its entrance into this brutal order went unnoticed at first. They were small in number, primitive by galactic standards, and unproven in war. Other species looked upon them with pity, expecting them to crumble like so many before. But the Threx were not content to let curiosity linger. To them, humans were prey wandering into a predator's den. What better way to remind the galaxy of their supremacy than to make an example of a newborn species? Commander Aric Vale stood on the bridge of the Resolute, eyes fixed on the projection of the colony world Tannin 4. He was a man built for command, calm in voice, steady in bearing, yet with a hardness carved from years of service in the void. His dark hair was streaked with gray, though he was not yet old, evidence of the weight he bore. He knew the Threx fleet was closing in. Intelligence reports confirmed it. 12 warships, each twice the size of his own, descending on a world with 40,000 settlers. No reinforcements would come. Beside him, Captain Doran Creed leaned forward over the console, fists clenched. Where Aric embodied restraint, Doran was fire, broad-shouldered, scarred across his jaw, and unwilling to hide the simmering rage in his eyes. He had seen what the Threx did to unprotected outposts, cities burned, populations enslaved or executed, reminders etched in blood. Doran had sworn never to watch it happen again. "They think we'll kneel," he muttered, voice low and rough. "They think we're just another flock to be culled." Aric did not turn, his gaze never leaving the fleet trajectory. "That is precisely what they think, which is why they'll strike without hesitation, and why we will not yield." A silence settled over the bridge. The men around them, pilots, technicians, marines, were young, some barely trained, their breaths held tight. But in Aric's voice there was no trace of doubt. To him, war was a calculation, and the Threx had already miscalculated. The first transmission arrived then, cutting across every channel. The image of Warlord Karzel filled the display, a towering figure of scaled flesh, plated armor gleaming with trophies from conquered worlds. His eyes were pits of cold fire, his fanged mouth curling in disdain. "Humans," he declared, his words dripping with contempt. "You step into our galaxy uninvited. You expand where you do not belong. Submit or be unmade. There is no place for prey that pretends its strength." Doran spat on the deck. "I'd sooner let him carve me open than bow to that." Aric allowed himself the faintest smile. "Then you'll get your chance." He keyed the transmission, his face appearing before the Threx warlord. "You call yourselves Alpha. You've mistaken us for prey. The mistake will be yours to pay for." He cut the channel before a reply could come. The declaration rippled through the bridge. Men who had moments before held fear now carried steel in their eyes. They would fight. Even against impossible odds, they would not kneel. The Threx fleet arrived within the hour. Warships broke from warp like thunder, blotting out the stars. 12 Leviathans against 6 human frigates and 1 colony defense station. The balance of power was absurd, hopeless to any rational strategist. Yet Aric's mind was not fixed on numbers. It was fixed on patterns, angles, weaknesses the Threx arrogance left exposed. The Resolute shuddered as weapons powered up. Doran took his post at tactical, barking orders with the heat of a man ready to bleed. The first salvo came, a rain of plasma that tore into the defense station, scattering debris like ash. Screams filled comms channels. Still, Aric remained steady. "Hold position. Let them believe we are frozen. Then strike where they are blind." And then the moment came. As the Threx pressed forward, overconfident in their superiority, Aric signaled his fleet to scatter. not retreating, but diving into the asteroid field that shadowed the colony's orbit. Human ships weaved between stone and dust, slipping where massive Threx hulls dared not follow. The hunters had to split their formation, exposing their flanks. Now, Aric commanded, and the void lit with human fire. Missiles streaked through cracks in the Threx armor, detonating at weak points overlooked in their design. One warship shuddered, venting flame, before tearing apart in a chain of explosions. For the first time in centuries, a Threx vessel fell to prey. Shock rippled across both fleets. The Threx roared in fury, rallying to crush the insolent newcomers. But for every strike they landed, humans answered with precision, with cunning, with defiance. Losses were brutal. Frigates torn apart, men lost to the void. Yet still they fought, still they learned. Each maneuver tested, adjusted, sharpened into something the Threx had not faced before, an enemy that refused to accept inevitability. Doran laughed through blood on his lip as the Resolute spun past a burning Threx ship. "Not prey," he shouted. "Not now, not ever." On the colony below, civilians watched the battle unfold like a storm in the heavens. Where terror had reigned, a new fire spread, the sight of humans standing against the Alpha. Win or lose, history was being written above their world. As the battle stretched on, Aric knew they could not claim full victory. The Threx were too many, their resources too vast. But victory was not the point. Survival was. Resistance was. A single truth needed to be carved into the stars. The Alpha could bleed. When the Resolute's final strike crippled the Threx command cruiser, fire blooming across its spine, the impossible had been achieved. The Threx retreated, dragging their broken with them, their pride shattered. Karzul's final transmission hissed through before his ship vanished into warp. "You will regret this defiance, human. You will regret it until your last breath." Aric Vale stood tall on the bridge, bloodied men around him, the colony world still alive below. He breathed slow, steady, as though already measuring the war to come. "We just showed them the truth," he said quietly. "They call themselves Alpha. But Alpha ends here. Would you like me to continue straight into Section 2 with the same narrative style, or pause so you can adjust tone/characters before I move forward?" You said. The void had grown quiet after the retreat, but silence was never safety. The Threx would return, and when they did, they would come with more ships, more fire, and a vengeance carved from their wounded pride. On the Resolute, Commander Aric Vale knew that the brief triumph had only bought time. He studied the tactical projections hovering above the bridge, his face unreadable, every line of thought hidden behind the iron mask of discipline. His men were celebrating survival, but Aric did not mistake survival for victory. Captain Doran Creed, however, thrived in the aftermath. He paced the deck with restless energy, the scar across his jaw catching the cold light of the consoles. "Did you see it?" he demanded of anyone who would listen. They bled. For all their boasting, they bled like any beast. And if we can wound them, we can kill them. His words sparked fire among the younger officers, but Aric did not join in the roar of approval. He kept his eyes on the stars. The transmission from High Command arrived hours later, confirming what Aric already expected. Reinforcements were weeks away, and the Threx were massing on the far edge of the sector. Humanity had its first true war, and the galaxy was watching. The colonies whispered in fear, other alien species in disbelief. No one had ever defied the Threx and survived the first blow. Aric understood the weight that now pressed on them. Humanity had entered the theater of predators, and there would be no exit except through blood. Doran slammed his fist onto the console as the orders came through. "Hold the line. Wait for reinforcements." He scoffed, shaking his head. "That's not a plan. That's a death sentence." Aric turned at last, his calm eyes meeting Doran's fire. "Then what do you suggest? Hit them before they gather. Strike hard, strike fast. Show them we're not prey cowering in the dark. We're hunters too." Aric regarded him for a long moment. Creed was reckless, but his recklessness was rooted in something deeper, an understanding of human spirit. If they waited, morale would rot. Fear would grow. But if they attacked, Even against reason, they could remind every man who fought that humanity was not broken. The decision was made in silence. The next day, 3 frigates broke from orbit under Aric's command, leaving the wounded ships behind to defend the colony. Their destination was a Threx supply convoy, identified by intelligence drones skirting the asteroid belt. It was a small target, but striking it would carry a message. As they neared the ambush point, tension thickened across the decks. Every man understood the risk. Doran stalked the corridors before battle, stopping at each station, his gravel voice cutting through the fear. Remember what they call us: soft, fragile, weak. Remember what you saw above Tannin. We are not prey. We are the ones who bite back. When the convoy emerged from warp, the trap was sprung. Human frigates erupted from the asteroid shadows, missiles and rail fire tearing through cargo hulls before the Threx could raise their shields. The enemy escorts turned in fury, their cannons blazing, but Aric's strategy unfolded with surgical precision. His ships danced between the convoys, weaving in close, exploiting blind arcs the Threx design never considered a threat. Doran's frigate Ironclad bore the brunt of the counterattack, its hull raked by fire, alarms shrieking across every deck. Yet instead of retreating, Doran ordered a boarding strike. Against Aric's command to hold formation, he launched drop shuttles straight into the heart of a Threx destroyer. The Marines followed him into the breach, tearing through corridors with shotguns and blades in brutal close quarters. Doran himself led the charge, roaring like a man possessed, his rifle barking flame until it clicked dry, then swinging it as a club against armored beasts. The destroyer's reactor went critical under the assault. Doran's team barely made it out, one shuttle consumed in the detonation, but the result was undeniable. Another Threx warship destroyed, its wreckage scattering across the void. Aric met him on the hangar deck when he returned, bloodied but grinning, his armor charred and dented. The commander's voice was measured, but sharp. You disobeyed orders. You risked everything. And it worked, Doran shot back, his grin never fading. Tell me those men didn't need to see that monster fall. Aric said nothing, but he did not reprimand him further. He knew Doran was right. The men needed symbols as much as they needed strategies. In Doran's reckless fury, they saw defiance given flesh. The raid crippled the convoy and sent ripples of shock through the sector. For the first time, the Threx had been struck on the offensive, prey daring to stalk the predator. Aric's calm strategies and Doran's audacity had combined into something the galaxy had never witnessed, a human war doctrine born in fire. But victories had their price. The Ironclad limped home, hull scarred, casualties heavy. Families on Tannin received the news with grief and pride, their mourning shrouded in the knowledge that their sons had bought time for thousands more to live. Aric walked the corridors of the wounded frigate in silence, his eyes tracing the faces of the dead in the casualty reports. Every loss was a weight he carried alone. Doran found him there, staring at the names. You can't keep counting like that, he said softly, the fire in his voice dimmed. If you do, this war will break you before it ends. Aric looked at him, his gaze steady. If I stop counting, I'll lose sight of what this war costs. And if I lose sight of that, I'll become no better than the ones we're fighting. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the call came through, new intelligence. The Threx had suffered more than wounded pride. Their warlord himself was moving to take command of the campaign. The full weight of their armadas was being gathered, not to reclaim honor, but to annihilate humanity entirely. Doran's eyes gleamed with anticipation, even as his fists clenched at the scale of what awaited them. Good. Let him come. Let the whole galaxy watch when we break their alpha in half. Aric turned back toward the stars, his voice quiet, almost a whisper meant only for himself. Then the hunt begins. Would you like me to move straight into Section 3 with the same tone and focus, or pause so you can suggest adjustments before I continue? You said. The Threx had never known fear. Worlds burned at their passing, species bowed before their advance, and for generations they had reigned without question. Yet now, whispers traveled through the void, spreading like fire through dry grass. Humans had struck them, wounded them, defied them. And worse, humans did not stop. Where other species submitted after a single reprisal, humanity pressed forward, turning defiance into pursuit. Commander Aric Vale stood over the star map aboard the Resolute, its surface alive with shifting red and blue markers. Each pinprick of light represented a clash, a raid, or a disappearance. The Threx fleets were vanishing into silence, convoys obliterated, garrisons left smoldering ruins. His calm features betrayed nothing of triumph. He knew this was not victory, it was escalation. Every strike forced the enemy to tighten their grip, to call upon greater numbers. But every strike also chipped away at the myth of Threx invincibility. Captain Doran Creed thrived in the chaos. His men followed him into battle with a fervor born not of duty, but of belief. He was more than a commander to them. He was proof that Threx blood could be spilled. After every raid, after every burning wreck of a warship, his voice carried through the decks. We are the storm they cannot cage. We are the fire that will consume them. His hunger for vengeance grew with every victory, and though his eyes burned with purpose, there was a darkness creeping in, a violence that no longer distinguished between necessity and desire. The next mission came not from high command, but from Aric himself. Intelligence suggested a Threx warlord's fleet was mustering near the gas giant Vanar, 6, preparing to cut off human colonies from one another. It was a trap meant to suffocate resistance. Aric decided they would spring it first. The fleet was small, 4 human ships against 8 Threx vessels, but the plan was not conquest. It was annihilation by guile. The ambush was laid with precision. Using a damaged frigate as bait, Aric transmitted false distress signals, luring the Threx into pursuit. The crippled vessel drifted near the rings of Vanar, 6, its engines sputtering, its shields flickering like a wounded animal. The Threx swarmed it eagerly, circling in to strike the killing blow. What they did not see were the mines hidden among the asteroids, seeded by Aric's crew in silence hours before. At his signal, the mines detonated in waves, tearing through enemy hulls. Chaos erupted as the Threx formation broke apart, their tight command structure unraveling in the storm. That was when the human frigates surged from hiding, weapons blazing with precision. Doran's ship led the charge, plunging straight into the heart of the melee. His voice roared across comms as he ordered boarding teams into the void once more. Rip them open. Show them what it means to hunt us. The clash was savage. Corridors filled with gunfire and blood, human marines fighting tooth and nail against the towering Threx soldiers. Doran himself cut a path through steel and flesh alike, his rifle bark echoing until his voice was hoarse from shouting. Aric directed the wider battle with surgical calm. His commands, cool and exact, turned chaos into orchestration. Every strike, every feint, every sacrifice folded into a design only he could see. When one of his frigates was crippled, he ordered it driven straight into a Threx destroyer, the collision igniting both ships in a sunburst that lit the giant's rings. The men aboard knew what they gave, and they gave it willingly, for Aric's steady voice made their deaths feel like purpose. When the smoke cleared, half the Threx fleet was reduced to wreckage, the rest retreating in panic. For the first time in memory, a warlord's banner ship lay shattered, its insignia drifting in the void. The human fleet, though battered and scarred, had survived. The myth of Alpha had cracked further. Yet victory tasted bitter. Reports streamed in of heavy casualties. Doran walked among the wounded afterward, his face streaked with blood, a grin still plastered across his features. "They'll remember this day," he growled. "They'll remember that their warlord fell screaming." His men cheered, yet some glanced at him uneasily. His thirst for violence was no longer only about survival, it had become a hunger of its own. Aric watched him from the shadows of the hangar, his expression unreadable. He admired Creed's fire, knew it inspired men in ways strategy never could. But he also saw the danger in it, the way it consumed restraint and left only rage. When Doran approached, still flushed from the battle, Aric spoke quietly. "One day, your fury will burn so hot it will consume us all." Doran met his gaze, unflinching. Better to burn bright and leave ashes than to fade like prey. You know as well as I do, this isn't a war we can half fight. If we don't become the monster, we'll be devoured by one. Aric said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. He carried the weight of every decision, every life lost, every step deeper into a war that would not end until one species lay extinct. He wondered how much humanity would lose of itself before that day came. The battle at Vanar 6 changed everything. The Threx, humiliated and enraged, called upon their full might. Reports flooded in of massive fleet movements, entire armadas converging to wipe out the upstart species. The galaxy watched with hushed anticipation, knowing the final confrontation was near. Other races, long cowed by the Threx, dared not interfere, but in their silence grew a new kind of fear, not of the Threx, but of humans. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Prey had become predator, and predator now sought annihilation. Humanity had crossed a line that could never be undone. On the bridge of the Resolute, Aric stood with his officers, the star map before him glowing with countless enemy markers. The coming storm would dwarf everything they had faced so far. He traced the red tide with his eyes, then spoke with quiet certainty. They will bring everything they have. We will answer with everything we are. Beside him, Doran's grin widened, his voice carrying the promise of blood. Then let's finish it. Let's tear their alpha crown from their skulls and show the galaxy who rules now. The men of the bridge straightened, their fear hardening into steel. They knew what was coming. The last hunt had begun. Would you like me to continue immediately into Section 4, keeping the same sharp tone, or do you want to fine-tune the pacing before we close the story? You said. The Threx came as promised, their armadas blotting out the stars. Entire constellations darkened beneath the weight of warships, their engines burning like suns as they closed in on human space. The galaxy held its breath. To most, the outcome seemed certain. The Alpha had been wounded, but now they would reclaim their throne with overwhelming force. To humanity, there was no certainty, only resolve. They had been marked for extinction, and so they chose to embrace the fight as if extinction was already behind them. Commander Aric Vale stood at the heart of the Resolute, his gaze steady on the tactical display. Countless red markers swarmed toward them, eclipsing the few scattered blue symbols that represented what remained of the human fleet. He did not tremble. He had lived long enough among soldiers to know that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. His men watched him as they prepared for the battle none of them expected to survive, and in his composure, they found strength. Captain Doran Creed was fire made flesh, pacing like a caged predator. His armor bore the scars of 100 skirmishes, his rifle never far from his grip. He was not content to wait. He wanted to strike, to bleed the Threx again, to carve their arrogance into ribbons. He leaned close to Aric, his voice low but urgent. This is it, Commander. No more games, no more skirmishes. Either we end them, or they end us. Aric nodded, his face unreadable. Then we end them. The plan was born not from desperation, but from ruthless clarity. The Threx armadas were vast, but their coordination depended on a central command hub hidden among their fleet, an immense vessel bristling with communication spires, the nerve center of their war. Destroy it, and the armada would collapse into chaos. It was suicide to strike so deep, but survival was no longer the measure. Humanity's only hope was to break the Alpha once and for all. The battle began as a storm of fire. Human frigates darted between leviathans, their smaller size turned into advantage by sheer audacity. The void lit with detonations as ships collided, tore apart, and burned. For every human vessel destroyed, 2 Threx ships fell in turn, undone by tactics they had never prepared for, maneuvers born from desperation, from cunning, from a refusal to submit. Doran led the spearhead. His frigate dove through the heart of the formation, weaving between bursts of plasma fire, shields screaming under the assault. His laughter carried through the comms, wild and fearless. You call yourselves Alpha? Then choke on the teeth of prey. He rammed his vessel into the shadow of the command hub, releasing boarding pods like a swarm of hornets. Aric coordinated the wider fleet, his voice calm even as reports of losses poured in. Entire squadrons were annihilated, colonies cut off, men and women dying by the thousands. Yet his orders never wavered. Hold formation. Protect the spear. Every life we spend buys the strike that ends them. His crew obeyed without hesitation. To them, his words were not commands. They were the only thread keeping them from despair. On the hub, Doran's boarding teams carved their way through alien steel. Corridors ran slick with blood, the air filled with smoke and the screams of the dying. Doran fought at the front, his rifle blazing until it overheated, then tearing into enemies with blade and fists. He moved like a force of nature, his men rallying around him as they pressed toward the reactor core. Aric watched the progress from the Resolute, the blips of friendly signals vanishing one by one as they pushed deeper into the hub. He knew what Doran intended. There would be no return. The reactor would have to be destroyed from within, and whoever lit the fuse would not escape. The comms crackled with Doran's voice, ragged but unbroken. "Tell them, Aric. Tell every man out there that this is the day humanity takes their crown." Aric's hand tightened into a fist. "Doran, do it." Aric drew a steady breath, then opened the channel to the fleet. His voice rang across every ship, every deck, every heart. "Men of Earth, today we carve our place in the stars. Today we show the galaxy that no predator rules us. Captain Creed and his men strike at the heart of the Alpha. Give them your strength. Give them your fire. For humanity, for every world, for every life they tried to steal, we fight." The cheer that erupted was deafening, even as ships burned and crews perished. In those final moments, humanity was united not in survival, but in defiance. Deep within the hub, Doran planted the charges around the reactor core. His armor was cracked, his body broken, but his eyes burned with triumph. Surrounded by corpses, both alien and human, he keyed the final sequence. His last words carried across the comms, a roar that echoed into eternity. "Alpha ends here." The explosion consumed the hub, ripping through its spires, tearing the heart from the Threx armada. Command dissolved into chaos, ships colliding in confusion, fire spreading unchecked. The human fleet pressed the advantage, driving into the disarray with merciless precision. Where once the galaxy saw an unstoppable predator, it now saw beasts thrashing in their death throes. When the void grew quiet again, the Threx were gone. Their fleet shattered, their worlds burning, their warlord dead, their dominion broken. Humanity had not merely survived, they had exterminated their would-be masters. The Alpha were no more. On the bridge of the Resolute, Aric Vale stood among the wreckage, his uniform scorched, his face shadowed by loss. Victory had come, but its weight was crushing. Doran was gone, along with thousands of others, their names etched forever into the silence of the stars. The men around him looked to their commander, waiting for words to bind their grief to purpose. He spoke softly, but his voice carried to every ear. "We were never prey. We were never weak. They wanted us broken, but we are unbroken. Remember this day, and remember the cost. The Alpha are dead, but humanity endures." Beyond the viewport, the galaxy stretched out vast and waiting, filled with species who had once cowered before the Threx. Now they whispered a new name in fear, a new predator that had risen from defiance. Humanity had shown what it meant to fight to the last breath, and in doing so, they had claimed a place not as prey, not as victims, but as something far more dangerous. The storm had passed, but in its silence lay a new question, one the galaxy would not stop asking. If humans could kill the Alpha, what would they do next?